Hello again, fight fans. I'm Michael Montero for Boxing Monthly. You're watching the Neutral Corner for the week of October 1st. Danuch! Real quick, not sure if you can see this or not, but if you haven't yet, download the Boxing Monthly app. You could get each episode or each issue down here. Again, I don't know how good you can see this, but if you download the app, you can download issues. Here's the most recent issue. And as you can see, Tyson Fury and Vladimir Klitschko are on the cover. More news about that in a second. But you could go through here and you could see some of the articles, the features in the issues. So if you haven't, download the Boxing Monthly app. Lots of good stuff there. Let's get into some news and notes. So the aforementioned Fury-Klitschko rematch that was supposed to take place October 29th is now kiboshed. It's technically postponed for what Fury's people are calling a medical issue. Take from that what you will. There's a lot of rumors going around. I think it's very, very well known that Tyson Fury has some mental issues. And I'm not saying that to be funny because he is a character and he says funny things, but seriously, he has some mental health issues. And there's people talking about bipolarism. There's people talking about deep clinical depression. I don't know. I'm not going to pretend to know. I try not to report on rumors, but there's obviously something going on there. And look, he didn't show up for press conferences during the press tour for this fight, and he already had an injury. Never said how the injury happened earlier this year with his ankle. Did it happen in training? Did it happen doing something else? But here's the thing. There's rumors. I've seen reports that this thing might get put back on the schedule for December, but that's not official yet at the time I'm recording this. Either way, it's almost a year since the first fight, since Tyson Fury beat Vladimir Klitschko by decision and apparently failed a drug test and tested positive for a banned substance, nandrolone, I think it was, a steroid, an anabolic steroid. And I think there was going to be a hearing about that test in October, this month. So it's been almost a year since that fight. There's a cloud of suspicion now over that fight because of that drug test, the rumors around it. Nothing's been substantiated. Like I said, there's going to be a hearing later this month, but it's time now for the sanctioning bodies to step in. After that fight, Fury was stripped of his IBF title, really through no fault of his own, because the IBF was simply following their rules. And at that point, they had a mandatory challenger. And because Fury was tied in contractually to the rematch with Vladimir Klitschko, and he exercised his rematch clause, basically, that title ended up going to Anthony Joshua, as you guys know. But Fury is still the WBA heavyweight titleist, WBO heavyweight titleist. It's been almost a year. By the time this thing finally gets rescheduled, as I said, they've talked about possibly December. I ain't buying it. It ain't going to happen until next year. It's going to be over a year since he's fought. Vladimir Klitschko, love him, hate him, think he's boring as hell, think he's good for boxing, bad for boxing, whatever. He's been training all year. He's been trying to get in the ring for the rematch with Fury. It's not fair to him, and it's not fair to the rest of the heavyweight division, let alone the fans who are basically trying to move on with their lives. I'm not saying the sanctioning body necessarily has to strip Tyson Fury, but maybe make an interim title, the WBO interim title. I know the WBA has 15 versions of the title already, but take your regular titleist, which I believe is Luis Ortiz, take Vladimir Klitschko, mandate those two to fight for the full WBA championship. Make Tyson Fury the champion in recess or something like that. And when he does come back, he gets the first crack at the winner. Same thing with the WBO. It's time for the sanctioning bodies to move in and do what they need to do so that the heavyweight division can move forward, because Tyson Fury isn't dependable. And by the way, if they try, it was rumored, I think, December 10th for Hamburg, Germany, to reschedule the fight. How do you sell tickets at this point? Fury has pulled out twice now. How do you sell tickets for any fight with Tyson Fury? And, are the networks, the venues, are they going to want to buy in with this guy right now? There's a lot of question marks. So it's a shame for British boxing. And British boxing's had a rough few weeks. But it's also a shame for the heavyweight division because things were really getting exciting this year. But the lineal heavyweight champion of the world is Tyson Fury. And he will not fight in 2016. Probably will not fight in 2016. That shouldn't happen. That should never, ever happen. Not this day and age. So this is really, really a buzzkill. Not that everyone was jonesing for this rematch, but as I've stated before, I really thought the rematch was going to be better than the first fight. The drug testing was going to be more stringent. It was going to be in the UK, where I think a more lively fight atmosphere would have basically been guaranteed. Klitschko was promising to throw more punches and be more offensively minded in the rematch. So whether all that mattered or whether it happened or not, I think people were expecting a better fight the second time around. So everyone's kind of bummed about this. But it's funny I mentioned that December 10th date because that brings me into my next thing here, my next story. As I mentioned last week, Canelo Alvarez injured his hand, and that December 10th date that HBO was holding for him now is open for Gennady Golovkin. HBO was holding November 26th, I believe, for Golovkin as well. Now they're talking about putting Vasyl Lomachenko on November 26th. Comes a lot cheaper. And there's actually a small chance that Nicholas Walters, remember him? Talk about guys who haven't fought in forever. Nicholas Axeman Walters might finally get in there against Vasyl Lomachenko on November 26th. It's a possibility, a pretty good possibility. But on December 10th, they'd be willing to throw more money out. They'll have more money to throw out to get Golovkin and Daniel Jacobs in the ring. I talked about this a little bit in previous episodes, but now there have been talks. And Tom Loeffler and Jacobs people have been discussing it. The network is involved. The negotiations have moved along far enough to where I'm not saying book your hotel and your plane tickets and all that yet, but it's looking like a strong possibility this thing's going to happen December 10th, Madison Square Garden. So that's good news. So, one door closes, another door opens. But going back to the heavyweight division, Jerrell Miller, Big Baby Miller, is in the middle of a contract dispute where he's trying to get out of his deal with his current promoters. And this thing hasn't turned ugly yet, but I think it's going to because his promoters do not want out of the deal. They have a lock-solid deal that Jerrell just kind of wants out of. So Big Baby Miller was probably one of the more interesting heavyweight prospects right now, at least in the United States. And he's probably going to be sitting idle for a while. And for a guy that big, they don't call him Big Baby for nothing, sitting idle, not necessarily the best thing. But this could kind of turn into a situation like Andre Ward had back with Dan Goossen, where Dan Goossen's contract was absolutely valid. And Goossen had done an outstanding job with Andre Ward. And Ward just wanted out of it because he just wanted more money, period. And Ward couldn't get out of it. He kept being rejected, and Goossen wouldn't give. And the only reason Andre Ward is fighting right now is because Dan Goossen passed away. So with Big Baby Miller's promoters, they're going to do the same thing. They're going to hold on to him, and it's going to take another bigger promoter coming around and offering money to Miller's promotion right now to get out of it. I think that's the only way it's going to happen is if somebody buys him out. Kind of a similar situation we saw with Luis Ortiz recently, where he was bought out of his contract with Golden Boy Promotions. But that's it for news and notes right now. Let's talk about some of the action from last week. So over in the Manchester Arena in the UK, in England, Jorge Linares scores a unanimous decision over Anthony Crolla to take his WBA title, but more importantly, to take the Ring Magazine lightweight title. So this is basically being seen by most as the lineal a creation of a new lineage at lightweight. This is a very, very talented division, but there are many, many titleists, and these things need to be unified. But for right now, there's a top dog, and that top dog is Jorge Linares. The scores were 115, 114, 115, 113, and 117, 111. I thought the fight was pretty much 8 rounds to 4 for Linares. I thought it was 116, 112. So my scores were kind of right in the middle of that. But the 115, 114 and the 115, 113, a little too close for me. I would agree more with the 117, 111 score. But for Linares, he improves to 41-3, 27 knockouts. Anthony Crolla drops to 31-5 with 3 draws. He's got 13 knockouts. This was a close competitive fight. It wasn't close. It was a competitive fight. And I think that Crolla really showed his mettle in this fight. He hung tough. It looked like he was hurt in the 6th round. It looked like he was buzzed a couple times late in the 11th and 12th. I thought Linares finished very strong and looked very rejuvenated in those late rounds. In some of the middle rounds, he kind of pulled back a little bit, and we've seen Linares in fights in the past kind of just shoot his wad and throw too many punches too early in a fight and gas and get stopped. That was not the case here. He kind of held back a little bit in some of the middle, later rounds, landed just enough, maybe gave a few rounds away. But I thought he closed the show very strongly and clearly won this fight. Linares now has won titles at featherweight, super featherweight, and now at lightweight. 3-time titleist. I've heard some people talking about he's in Hall of Fame consideration. I don't agree with that. I don't think he's there. Look, 3-time titleist, it sounds great, but in this age of boxing, look, Adrian Broner, he's won, I think, 4 titles in 4 different weight classes, so he's not a Hall of Fame fighter. You can win titles in multiple weight classes, especially in the lower divisions, where you're talking 3-4 pounds difference sometimes between weights. So Linares, he would need another big signature victory, or maybe a title at 140 or something to even start that type of Hall of Fame consideration. But very good fighter, and carved out a very good career for himself. He had very high expectations because of his talent. Hasn't quite lived up to them, but almost has now. I think that one more big win or something, you could say he lived up to expectations. But Eddie Hearn said that there is a rematch clause for this fight, and they do intend to use the rematch clause. So it's probably going to be early next year, and the rematch will be in Manchester, Hearn says. So even though Linares won this fight, I think it's just mandated somewhere in the contract that if they do the rematch, Hearn gets to decide where, and they're going to put it back in Manchester, where they did a lively crowd there. And why wouldn't they do a big sellout crowd for this fight next year? Because it was a really good, entertaining scrap. And who knows? Maybe Anthony Crolla can go back and look at the tape here and see what he did wrong and make adjustments. We'll see. But look, if these two guys fight again, I'll be there. I want to see it. I mean, this was a great fight. Over here in the U.S. at StubHub Center, the Filipino Donnie Nietes scores a unanimous decision over Edgar Sosa. The scores were 120, 108 3 times. For Nietes, this was his first fight officially at flyweight. He's been one of the better little guys in recent years, actually for a while now, not just recent years, really of this past era. He's been one of the better little fighters. Started at 105 to 108, now at 112. He wants a piece of the action with Juan Francisco Estrada, Roman Gonzalez, the monster, Inoue. Those guys are at 115, so maybe Nietes was testing the waters at 112, and now he's going to move up to 115. I'm not sure. But I'll tell you this much. If he can't stop this version of Edgar Sosa, he dominated this fight, 120, 108 3 times, like I said. But if you can't stop Edgar Sosa at this stage of his career, or at least drop him a couple times, I just worry if Nietes just lacks the pop at flyweight, and if he had to move up 3 more pounds super flyweight to really contend with those fighters. But he wants in, so let's see what he does. Maybe he moves up a few more pounds and goes for one of those big fights. Maybe he stays at flyweight and tries to win titles there. I think, obviously, now that Estrada, now that Gonzalez have moved up, Nietes could really do some great work in that division at 112 pounds. So we'll see what he does there. He's definitely a key player. But if he wants to chase the money, that's at 115 pounds. That was really all the big action last week. Let's talk about some of the stuff coming up this week. This Friday, on the last day of September, September 30th, at Fantasy Springs Casino in Ontario, California, maybe a couple hours away from me here in LA, Michael Perez is taking on Petr Petrov in I think, a really, really good matchup on paper. I think that this should be a pretty entertaining scrap. It's a lightweight fight on Australia TV. For those of you who don't know about Michael Perez, East Coast fighter out of Newark, New Jersey, 26 years old, good size lightweight, 5'8", 71-inch reach. He's 24, 1-2 with 11 knockouts. Not a lot of pop, but he's got some very good craft. He's a good, nifty, shifty boxer. He was the 2008 lightweight national Golden Gloves champion here in the United States. So he had a pretty good amateur career. He fought, his last fight was out here in LA at Belasco Theater at one of the LA Fight Club cards. He looked pretty good, some nice skills, just doesn't have a lot of pop on his punches. Going up against Petr Petrov, you guys probably know him. You probably remember him from winning the 2014 lightweight Boxino tournament. He's Russian-born, but based in Spain. So he's a Russian guy who speaks Spanish. He's 5'6", 69-inch reach, 33 years old. So he's been in there, been in a few wars. I wouldn't say wars, but he's been in some tough, grueling fights. Experienced guy, smaller guy. He's 37, 4-2 with 18 knockouts. So another guy who doesn't have a lot of pop. Petrov, to me, is one of these guys who's really carved out a nice career for himself, gotten better on the job as he's gone along. And really the last 2 or 3 years, he's just kind of hit his stride later in his career. You see that happen sometimes. You know, a lot of fighters, you think they hit their stride in their late 20s, right around 30 years old. Petrov is one of those guys who really found himself, found his little niche in this game in his early 30s. And you don't always see that for a lightweight, for a smaller fighter. So this is going to be a classic youth versus experience thing. Perez is the bigger guy, the younger guy. Petrov, obviously the more experienced, but in there with much better opposition. Neither guy hits very, very hard. For Petrov, because he's the smaller guy, probably the slower guy, I think Perez is probably faster, a little flashier with his combinations. Petrov is going to have to grind him, outwork him. So I think he knows that. That's how he wins fights at this stage of his career. So that's why I think this will be a fun fight. If you have Australia TV, check it out. If not, look for a stream or something. But that should be a fun one. This Saturday in Germany, WBA light heavyweight titleist Juergen Braehmer is going up against Nathan Cleverly, defending his title again, the German. These two were supposed to fight in 2011. But Braehmer pulled out, and there was some kind of shady allegations of why he pulled out, and I believe the sanctioning organizations stepped in at one point and stripped him of his title because there was just a lot of rumors floating around. Braehmer's had issues in the past. I think he was actually jailed for burglary and stuff like that, like way, way earlier in his career or something. So he's had some issues, but look, he has a title at light heavyweight. I recognize titles do matter, but this is one of those titles that to me is meaningless. Braehmer was a good amateur. In fact, he beat Ricky Hatton, Felix Sturm, and Carl Froch in the amateurs. He won about 100 amateur fights, I think. Did very well for himself there. But as a pro, he's fought his entire career in Germany. His opposition is horribly weak. Nathan Cleverly, at his best, was a good quality light heavyweight fighter, but he's now 3-3 in his last 6 fights, going back to 2013 when Sergey Kovalev just destroyed him. So he's only fought 6 times since 2013, and he's only won 3 of those against less than stellar opposition. So this fight is 5 years past its due date. for a title that I think has absolutely no weight. We all know who the light heavyweight champion of the world is. We know who the best one or two contenders at light heavyweight are. That's Andre Ward and that's Adonis Stevenson. Everybody else in the division is kind of floating in the same place, right? And that's where Braehmer fits, somewhere in there. So I just don't care about this fight. I mention it because it is a title fight, but I also mention it to say, guys, titles, yes, they matter, but you got to know what's behind the title. And this is an example where who gives a shit? This title's meaningless. This fight's meaningless. I hope Nathan Cleverly can pull it out and grab that title and bring it to the UK. UK boxing could use it after a rough few weeks. But more than that, because if he wins the title, I know Cleverly is going to fight somebody good with it. He's going to defend it against a quality fighter because Cleverly doesn't duck anybody because he's a real fighter. So, yeah, I'm supposed to be impartial here. I'm kind of rooting for Cleverly in that fight. That being said, he doesn't stand a chance. Braehmer by decision. Cleverly would have to knock him out to win this fight. Also on Saturday in New Zealand, undefeated heavyweight prospect Joseph Parker going up against Alexander Dimintrenko. This will be his fourth fight in 2016. I love this. Staying busy. He's the mandatory for Anthony Joshua. Anthony Joshua is supposed to have a fight coming up, I think, in late November of this year. I don't think an opponent has been announced yet. They have a short list. But Parker is preparing for that fight. He's fighting a tall guy who does have some skills, does have some experience. Obviously, Alexander Dimintrenko is not on the level of Anthony Joshua, but this is a very, very good test for young Joseph Parker. And if he passes this test well, I think him and his team can move forward into that fight with Anthony Joshua with a lot of confidence. So, no TV outlets that I know of in the West for that fight, but there's got to be a stream out there somewhere. If any of you guys know of a stream for that fight, please post it down below because that's one to definitely check out to see how Parker looks against a much taller guy with good skills. Not great skills, but good skills, right? It would be very, very interesting to see. That's really it though, guys. And look, we're hitting another dry spell here in October. I think this just tends to be how it goes. October is usually a slow month. Things are going to pick up again in November. It looks like we're going to get a nice close to this year. This year's been rough, but we're going to get some nice fights in November and early December. But October 8th, I mentioned Juan Francisco Estrada earlier. This will be his first fight and is at 115 pounds. He's fighting in Mexico. So he's going to test the waters at 115 before going after the top dogs in that division next year. That division is going to be a lot of fun over the next 1 to 2 years, man. October 15th, Tony Bellew going up against BJ Flores, defending his WBC 200-pound title in Liverpool. BJ Flores does just enough to pretty much lose every round. So he'll get in there, stick and move, and be competitive, but this is pretty much going to be a showcase for Bellew. I would like to see Tony Bellew get a stoppage here and really, really make a statement, but I expect him to win a decision in that fight. October 22nd, Billy Joe Saunders going up against TBA, to be announced, Tom Bob Anderson in Cardiff, Wales to defend his WBO title. That middleweight title, man, there's another guy who hasn't fought this entire year, pretty much a non-factor, was going to be the co-feature on that Fury-Klitschko rematch card on the 29th. That got kiboshed, so they're bumping him up to the 22nd to headline a card. But again, no opponent. So the next big fight isn't until November 5th when Manny Pacquiao is fighting Jesse Vargas, if you could call that a big fight. I think it's a competitive, fun fight. I think that Jesse Vargas is actually a very, very live dog in that one, but we'll talk more about that later on. So look, I'm not going to have an episode every week in October of the Neutral Corner, but we'll have a couple, one or two maybe, depending on the news and notes and the developments of some of these possible fights I've talked about. If some of this stuff comes to fruition, I'll definitely do some episodes to talk about it. Other than that, it's going to be a pretty dark, pretty dry month for boxing. So you guys will see me around. Like I said, I'll do at least one show of TNC in October. Maybe more if things get real interesting with Golovkin-Jacobs and all that. And then any fights that are announced, you know, if it's big enough and there's news, I'll do separate videos just for that stuff. But it should be fun closing out the year, man. I'm actually holding out hope. I don't know if you can hear that. That's me knocking on my desk. It's wood. For luck, hoping that some of these fights come through. Golovkin-Jacobs in New York. I don't care if it's the end of the year and I have a ton of work to do here in LA. I'm going out there for that fight because that's going to be awesome. That's all I got for this week, guys. Let me know what you think. Like, comment, subscribe, share. Get this channel out there. I want 3,000 subscribers by the end of the year. That's the goal. I'll see you guys at the fights.